Hello YouTubers, this is my wife's 2009 Nissan Qashqai. We've been having some funny problems with it where when you're doing, once you get to 40 mile an hour, very noticeable wheel wobble, and it appears to be worse as you accelerate. So as soon as it happened overnight, the first thing you kind of think of is a bulged tyre, or maybe some wheel weights thrown off, but it felt a bit more extreme than just wheel wobble, out balanced wheels. So I thought better investigate. So first thing we did was jack the car up and check all the tyres, spun them all, and they all seemed fine. But the one thing I did notice was the ball joint and the wishbone there, and that was the old one, so went off and got a new one. I think that is the part number of it there. Went to take it out and realised that it's not so much the ball joint was worn, but the arm where it sits in, as you can see, they hold in with a circlip, and it is all very loose, rather worn. So it's like, well, I suppose you could weld the arm up, but not very clever since the steering components and quite critical. So went off and got another wishbone, which annoyingly comes with a new ball joint in it, but since I intend to keep the car for a while, I'm going to hang on to the ball joint since it's only 20 quid. So it'll probably wind up on the nearest side at some point, because they do tend to wear, bouncing up and down the gutter. So we put this arm on and thought, oh well, yeah, that's okay. Take it for a drive, it's just as bad. So at that point we're sort of, well, you sort of spin the wheels and they all look okay. So we put the spare on and then started swapping the wheels around in sequence. And my mate has got Dave has got a wheel balancer, so we put the wheels on one after another on the balancer, and they were all absolutely fine. So then you start digging a bit further, and discovered that the drive shaft has got a rather large amount of wear on it. I'll show you that in a moment. It certainly rattles around like you wouldn't believe. So the fix for that is a new drive shaft from eBay. If you look at your typical online car parts suppliers, the price of them is pretty steep. The sort of base price for them seems to start at £300. Then you get all your discount codes and all that, but they're still well over £100. But these, and I have used these shafts before, come from eBay, and I think it was £59 delivered. I am sure they're probably made in China or Taiwan. I think probably Taiwan, because they're big manufacturers of all these sorts of car parts. Like I said, I've used them before. I put them on my nephew's old Peugeot 106, which he managed to just drive the joints on with his extremely aggressive gear changing technique, I would say. But they certainly lasted a while with the abuse he was giving them, so I think they're fairly good value for money. Right, from underneath there, we put a pair of mole grips on the inner part of the drive shaft, because there's a bearing in that sort of plumber block there. And as we wiggle it, let's go in the dark there, Dave. Yeah, that's better like that. Yeah, that's it. You can see how the inner CV is rattling around, and the outer shaft is all wobbling about, and that is the cause of the problem. Right, we've had the wheel off, and now the split pin. Remove the split pin. A pair of side cutters are usually the best thing to pull these out. So that's the old split pin out. So next thing we're going to do is put the wheel back on. In the meantime, we found a nice big socket which goes on there, and that's the same size as the new one. So we'll be putting the wheel back on and dropping the car back down to the floor, so you've got the resistance of the wheel on the floor, and crack that half shaft nut, or drive shaft nut. Right, we've got the breaker bar on there, stuck back through the wheel, and I'm going to put my large boot on it, see if it cracks. Oh, that is pretty tight. That's how you crack the drive shaft nut. Right, I'm going to spin him off the rest of the way with the air gun. That's the wrong way. And there he be, dropped on the floor. Right, here we are. We're going to take the the lower track control arm or wishbone or whatever you want to call it off at the ball joint. So pull the bolt out. And generally what we're going to do is put a and find a nice big bar. Right, you see what we've done here? We've got a nice big bar which goes across the bottom of the track control arm and presses on the sort of jacking point on the bottom edge of the thing. Got a great big long piece of tube stuffed on the end of it, so we've got plenty of leverage. And going to lever away and maybe give it a nice smack to give it a bit of shock as well. No, more abuse. Right, we've belted it a few times and it's starting to come down now, so if I tap it a bit more over here, it comes loose. And now we've got the whole hub assembly loose. Next step is get the drive shaft out of the hub, which would tap on the other end out there. And then we'll be withdrawing the drive shaft out of the plumber block and out the gearbox. We will be losing the gearbox oil, but I am going to change the gearbox oil, so not forget we'll be putting a bucket underneath the capsule oil so it doesn't go all around the workshop as it normally does with me.
Then we'll show them how to
what we're going to do is hit the drive shaft out. Now if you were going to say change your CV rubbers, you do the same procedure, but the best thing to do is put the nut back on a couple of turns so hopefully you don't damage the thread, and then in this case a piece of aluminium bar or brass bar, something like that, lump of copper mallet is good, even a piece of really solid hardwood. I don't think I can film this and hit it at the same time, not having three hands, so we'll give it a little tap and see if it starts to move, and I'll show you that. A couple of taps and it fell in, so if I take the nut off now, then you just pull in from the other side and you can see it disappear. Now the whole lot is swinging free, so now we can look at pulling the drive shaft out from underneath, out of the gearbox or the differential. Underneath now, this is the plumber block and it's got a couple of bolts that hold it in place, but you don't have to take them right out. The bottom one you get loosen it, and the top one is already loosened. You take out and the whole lot swings down like that. That just holds the bearing in place. So the next step now, I'm going to try and lever the shaft out of the gearbox, and this is where we might start getting a bit oily. You can see the bearing.
Oil.
All running, you can see the bearing starting to come out of the plumber block now. What we have to do is heat up the back of the plumber block, because it's aluminium, but being careful not to melt it with the oxyacetylene torch. I mean, normally you would expect that to tap out of there without having to give it that kind of abuse. You can see the gearbox all running out now, so I think we'll shut the camera off and then worry about the oil. Right, we've taken the plumber block here off the back of the engine, only held on with 3 volts. You can see the balls there, one down there, the one in the middle is not part of it. It's previously been a bit brutalised, so we're going to give it a clean up with a little emery wheel so that it's all clean in there, and smear it with grease, so hopefully our new bearing will slip in there a bit nicely. Right, what we did is it's a bit hard to show in the workshop because it's a bit dark and stuff in there. We cleaned the inside of the plumber block up where the bearing goes in there and fitted it all on the bench because it's a lot easier. Put the clamp back on with the 2 bolts, and we're going to offer the whole lot up from underneath. We've greased that end of the spline to go in the gearbox to make it a little bit easier. We will also grease the other end a little bit when we've got it in, and we're trying to put that into the hub to make it help it slide in a bit easily. At least with bolting it all up in one piece is just the plumber block to be secured with the 3 bolts. Right, we've bolted the plumber block back up inside there, so the drive shaft's in, a little bit of tapping in. So we're just going to put a little bit of grease on the end of the splines and pop it all back in the centre of the hub. You can see it coming in there, twiddle it round so it lines up with the splines. There we go. You can see the little bit of grease we tapped on there. So we put the new nut on, tighten it up and put a new pin through there, and this basically tighten the wheel nut up and drive shaft nut up and put the wheel back on, and hopefully the job's a good one. Right, here we are then, that's the drive shaft back in, and most importantly the bottom ball joint bolt in and nut on and all tightened up correctly. Plumber blocks all back in, everything tightened up. The bolts that hold the bearing into the plumber block tightened up as well, and drive shaft all the way into the gearbox. We will be changing the gearbox all in a minute, but that's not very exciting, so I don't really bother to show you that. Yeah, brake disc has seen better days. I think that'll be being replaced shortly. So now let's put the wheel back on, tighten the drive shaft nut up and put a new split pin in, and hopefully, as I say, the job's a good one.